Chapter 1. An Echo in the Alley. The diner air hung thick and heavy, a greasy ghost of fried onions and burnt coffee. Ashley moved through it like a swimmer fighting a current, the weight of a 12-hour shift pressing down on her shoulders. Each step was a quiet protest. Stacking plates felt like lifting stones. Wiping counters felt like erasing herself, again and again. She existed in the background hum of other people's lives. A quick smile, a coffee refill, a ghost in an apron. But when the back door clicked shut behind her, the cool night air was a welcome shock, washing the diner's grime from her skin. Beyond the overflowing dumpster and the single flickering bulb that cast long, dancing shadows was her secret, her only one. He was waiting. Just a boy, really. Lost in the ragged folds of a coat far too big for his thin frame, huddled in the deepest part of the darkness where the light couldn't touch. He never spoke. Not once. He just appeared some nights, a silent question in the gloom. And she would answer. Tonight it was half a burger and a handful of fries, wrapped carefully in a napkin. Her own dinner. She set the small bundle down on the clean edge of a crate, then retreated a few steps, giving him space. It was their ritual, a silent dance she cherished. His eyes, when they caught the light, were the most startling color, a deep, molten gold that seemed to burn with a hidden fire. They were too old for his young face. They watched her now, not with gratitude, but with a fierce, quiet intensity that made her feel seen, really, truly seen, for the first time all day. He moved like a shadow, quick and fluid, snatching the food before melting back into the darkness. She listened to the soft sounds of him eating, and the knot of loneliness in her own chest loosened just a little. Because here, in this filthy alley, her kindness mattered. It was a real thing. This went on for weeks. A shared silence, a small offering, a flicker of connection in the dark. He was a constant, the only one she had. Until tonight. The alley was empty. A cold breeze swirled around her ankles, carrying the stench of garbage and something else. A profound emptiness. She waited, and waited. The minutes stretched into an hour. The flickering bulb above buzzed, a lonely insect sound in the sudden, crushing silence. He wasn't coming. There was no explanation, no goodbye. Just nothing. The space he occupied was now a gaping hole in her routine, in her heart. Had he been a figment of her imagination? A dream she cooked up to survive the monotony? The alley felt hollowed out, and as she stood there, clutching the cold, uneaten food in her hands, she realized with a sickening lurch that she was completely, utterly alone again. The silence that followed was louder than any word he had never spoken, a final, definitive answer to a question she was too afraid to ask. Chapter 2. The Bonfire of Whispers. The pack gathering felt like a different planet. Here the air wasn't stale with old grease, but sharp with the scent of pine smoke and damp earth. A massive bonfire roared into the night sky, spitting embers that danced like angry fireflies. Wolves in human skin laughed and drank, their voices loud, their confidence a physical force that pushed Ashley to the edges of the clearing. She leaned against an old oak tree, nursing a cup of lukewarm cider, trying to make herself as small as the shadows. Belonging here was like trying to breathe water. You could want it with every fiber of your being, but it would still drown you, because she was different, unmarked, unchosen. In the pack's brutal, simple math, that made her less than zero. "Look what the cat dragged in," a voice purred, dripping with saccharine poison. Calla. Of course. She sauntered over, her perfect blonde hair gleaming in the firelight, flanked by two other she-wolves who mirrored her smug smile. Calla's mate, the beta's son, had marked her last spring, and she wore the faint, silvery scar on her neck like a crown. "Still flying solo, Ashley? You'd think by now you'd have convinced someone to take pity on you." Ashley's fingers tightened around her cup. She wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut Calla down, but the words caught in her throat. Her best defense was a wall of sarcastic indifference. "Just enjoying the view, Calla. It's not every day you get to see so much desperation in one place." Calla's smile tightened. "Desperation? Honey, that's the smell of power. Something you wouldn't recognize." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Everyone knows a weak wolf gets left behind. It's the way of the world. Fate doesn't make mistakes." The words were a direct hit, striking the deepest, most bruised part of her soul. Weak. The brand they'd seared onto her skin since she was a child. Her own parents had looked at her with a kind of gentle pity. They'd hoped she'd find a place, but they never expected it. She was just Ashley, the quiet one, the one who wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or fierce enough. But then a new energy rippled through the crowd. A hush fell. The laughter died. Even Calla straightened up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Whispers slithered through the pack like smoke. "He's back. The Alpha's son. They say he's more animal than man. The Alpha's heir. A ghost. A legend. He'd been sent away years ago, a boy too volatile, too wild to control. Now he was returning to claim his birthright." Ashley felt a strange shiver of unease crawl up her spine. The pack needed a strong leader, everyone knew that. But the way they spoke of him, it wasn't with hope. It was with a kind of primal dread. They spoke of a monster, a king forged in exile and shadow, returning to cast judgment on them all. Chapter 3. The Scent of Fate. He walked out of the darkness and into the firelight, and the world stopped. It wasn't just a figure emerging from the trees. It was as if the night itself had taken a human form, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an aura of such intense, predatory power that the very air seemed to crackle around him. The pack parted before him, heads bowed in submission. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly silent, utterly lethal. His face was all harsh angles and shadows carved from stone and fury, but it was his eyes. Oh God, his eyes. They were gold, a deep, molten gold that burned with a hidden fire. Ashley's breath hitched. The cider cup slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the ground with a soft thud. Time stretched and warped, the roaring bonfire shrinking to a distant candle flame, the voices of the pack fading into a dull, meaningless roar. All she could see was him, the quiet boy from the alley, her boy. But he was gone. In his place stood this man, this prince of shadows, this king of the wild. The ragged coat was replaced by a perfectly tailored black jacket, the hunger in his face replaced by a cold, unreadable mask of authority. He was magnificent and terrifying. His gaze swept over the silent pack, dismissive, assessing. And then, for a single, heart-stopping second, his eyes met hers. Boom. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A cataclysmic jolt that shot through her body like a bolt of lightning, setting every nerve ending on fire. The world exploded into pure sensation. She could smell him from across the clearing, the impossible, intoxicating scent of pine after a thunderstorm, of wet earth and wild ozone. A golden thread, invisible but stronger than steel, snapped taut between them, pulling at the very center of her soul. Her wolf, dormant and quiet for years, rose up and howled in recognition, in triumph, in pure, unadulterated joy. Mate. The word wasn't a thought. It was a truth that slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Her mate. This powerful, dangerous stranger who was also the silent, broken boy she had fed from her own hands. A dizzying wave of elation and terror washed over her. It was impossible. It was a fairy tale. It was everything. He saw it. She knew he did. A flicker of something, shock, recognition, pain, flashed in those golden depths. His jaw tightened. For a fraction of a second, the cold mask cracked, and she saw the boy she remembered, lost and tormented. But then it was gone. He slammed a wall of ice down behind his eyes. His gaze slid over her, past her, through her, as if she were nothing more than a tree or a rock. He offered no sign of recognition, no acknowledgement of the cataclysm that had just ripped through her entire being. He turned his attention to the Alpha, his father, and the moment was over. He had looked right at her and made his choice. He pretended she didn't exist. The golden thread between them didn't break, but it was now humming with a new and agonizing vibration. The sharp, cutting edge of rejection. The highest high and the lowest low, all in the space of a single heartbeat. Fate had brought him back to her, only to have him turn his back and walk away. Chapter 4. A Crown of Ash. The world was a roaring, buzzing thing in Ashley's ears. She stood frozen, a statue in the heart of a hurricane, while the pack's whispers swirled around her. Mate. The word was a brand on her soul, a soaring song of hope. But Damien's eyes, they were a frozen wasteland. He hadn't moved. He hadn't breathed a word. He just stood there, a king carved from ice, looking at her as if she were a ghost at his coronation. The silence stretched, thin and fragile, until it was shattered by the Alpha's booming voice. "Well, Damien?" The old wolf's voice was gravel and command. "The moon has blessed you. Who is she? Present your mate." Every head turned. Every eye was on her. This was it. The moment that would change everything. The humiliation from Calla would be wiped away, replaced by honor. She would finally belong. Damien's gaze, cold and distant, finally settled on her. He took a single step forward. The firelight caught in his golden eyes, making them burn. His voice, when it came, was clear, strong, and utterly devoid of warmth. It rolled across the clearing like thunder. "Her name is Ashley. She is my mate." A collective gasp went through the crowd. A wave of pure, dizzying joy crashed over Ashley. It was real. Her head felt light, her heart a wild bird taking flight. She saw the shock on Calla's face, the disbelief. It was a victory sweeter than any she had ever imagined. But the thunder wasn't finished. Damien didn't smile. He didn't move toward her. He just stood there, his face a mask of stone, and delivered the killing blow. "And I reject her." Silence. A deep, profound, bottomless silence that swallowed the crackling of the fire and the rustle of the leaves. The word echoed in the stillness. Reject. It was a poison dart, striking her right in the heart. The joyous bird in her chest fell from the sky, dead. "She is weak," Damien continued, his voice cutting through her shock like shards of glass. "Unmarked, unworthy. She will not be my Luna." The whispers started again, but this time they weren't of awe. They were of pity, of scorn. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, not with respect, but with a morbid curiosity. She was a spectacle, a joke. The Alpha heirs chosen, thrown away like trash in the same breath. Calla's lips curled into a slow, cruel smile of triumph. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket that threatened to choke her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was run. She turned and fled, stumbling away from the firelight, away from the prying eyes and the poison whispers, plunging into the cold, welcoming darkness of the forest. The single, perfect moment of joy was now just a cruel memory, a crown made of ash. Later that night, curled in a miserable ball on her lumpy mattress, a soft scratching sound came from her window. Her heart leaped into her throat. She froze, listening. Scratch, scratch. Slowly, she crept to the window and peeled back the thin curtain. A pair of haunted golden eyes stared back at her from the darkness. It was Damien. The cold, powerful prince was gone. In his place was the boy from the alley, haggard, tormented, and utterly broken. He looked at her, his expression one of pure agony, and whispered a single, desperate word. "Please." Chapter 5. The poisoned vow. He slipped through the open window like a ghost, bringing the scent of the cold night air and a storm of turmoil into her tiny, shabby room. The sheer size of him seemed to shrink the space, his powerful shoulders nearly brushing the slanted ceiling. He wasn't the cold alpha air from the bonfire anymore. He was a man coming apart at the seams, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, his breathing ragged. He looked at her, and the pain in his golden eyes was so raw it was a physical wound. "You have 5 seconds to start talking," Ashley whispered, her voice shaking with a fury she didn't know she possessed. 5 seconds before I scream this whole pack down on your head. I had to," he stammered, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked lost, a king without a kingdom. "You had to?" she hissed, taking a step forward. All the hurt and humiliation from the bonfire boiled over. "You had to stand me up in front of everyone I've ever known and tear me apart? You had to announce to the world that I was your mate and then call me trash in the same breath? Why?" "To protect you," he finally roared, the sound so full of anguish that it rattled the cheap glass in the window pane. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his shoulders slumping. "To save you. From me." Her anger faltered, replaced by a reluctant, cautious curiosity. Save me from what? He sank onto the edge of her small wooden chair, which groaned under his weight. He looked at his hands, his voice dropping to a raw, broken whisper. "My father, the Alpha. He doesn't love me. He never wanted a son. He forged a weapon. Years ago, when my powers first manifested, he bound me with old, dark magic. A curse." He finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "The curse feeds on my attachments, on my love. The stronger my feelings, the more power it gives him over me. It twists what I hold dear and turns me into a monster that will destroy it." The pieces clicked into place, horrible and sharp. The boy in the alley, he was hiding. Not just from the pack, but from his own father. "So, the rejection," she breathed, her heart aching. "It was the only thing I could do," he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "By pushing you away, by making the pack see you as worthless to me, I'm trying to starve the curse. I'm trying to keep you out of his reach. Because if he knew how much the bond is already calling to me." He trailed off, unable to finish. She saw it then. This wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of desperate, terrified sacrifice, an instinct to help, to soothe, washed over her. She took a hesitant step closer, her hand lifting without her permission. He flinched as her fingers brushed against his cheek, but he didn't pull away. A jolt, warm and electric, shot up her arm. The mate bond hummed between them, alive and undeniable. His eyes fluttered shut, and a pained groan escaped his lips. He leaned into her touch for a bare second before pulling back as if he'd been burned. "Don't," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Ashley, please. I will lose myself if I keep you close, and you will lose everything." Chapter 6, Marked by Danger. I won't be your secret. The words left Ashley's mouth before she could stop them, firm and clear in the small, quiet room. Damien looked at her, his face a canvas of surprise and pain. "I understand why you did it," she continued, finding a strength she didn't know she had. "But I won't live in the shadows, Damien. I won't hide and pretend to be nothing, just so you can fight your battles alone. That's not a life. It's a cage." She wanted to run. Part of her, the smart part, was screaming to pack her single bag and disappear before sunrise. Leave the pack, the curse, and this beautiful, tormented man behind. Find a normal life somewhere far away from all this magic and misery. Before Damien could reply, a loud crash echoed from the front of the diner downstairs, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Shouts erupted. Male voices, angry. "Stay here," Damien ordered, his eyes instantly shifting from pained to predatory. He moved towards the door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But Ashley wasn't a fool. They weren't here for the diner. They were here for her. She followed him out of the room and onto the landing that overlooked the small eatery. Below, 3 large wolves from the pack stood amidst the wreckage of overturned tables. It was Calla's mate, Marcus, and 2 of his cronies. Their eyes were fixed on her, glowing with malice in the dim light. "Well, well," Marcus sneered, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Look who's entertaining the Alpha's broken toy. We just came to see the little stray that's causing so much trouble." "Get out," Damien snarled, placing himself in front of Ashley. His voice was no longer human. It was deeper, rougher, laced with the command of an alpha. Marcus just laughed. "Or what? You'll reject us too? You've shown everyone your weakness. A true alpha would have put this mud in her place. Or maybe," he said, his eyes darkening with intent, "he'd let his pack do it for him." He lunged. It happened so fast. One moment Damien was a man, the next he was a blur of violence. He didn't fully shift, but the change was terrifying enough. His teeth elongated into fangs. Black claws ripped through the skin of his fingertips. His golden eyes blazed with a feral, unrestrained fury. He met Marcus midair with a roar that shook the entire building, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. The fight was not a fight. It was a brutal, one-sided execution. He moved with impossible speed, a whirlwind of claws and teeth, tearing into the 3 wolves who dared to threaten her. There were howls of pain, the sickening crunch of bone, and then silence. Marcus and his friends lay broken and whimpering on the floor. Damien stood over them, chest heaving, his body trembling with the effort of holding back the monster inside him. A splatter of blood marked his cheek. He slowly turned to face her, the feral light still burning in his eyes. And in that moment, Ashley knew. The smart part of her that wanted to run died a quiet death. She looked at the carnage, at the man, the wolf, who had just unleashed hell to protect her, and the terrifying truth settled over her. There was no escape. She was marked, not by the bite of a mate, but by the violence done in her name. Running would be a death sentence. The pack now saw her as the key to the future Alpha's stability. They would hunt her, and he would always, always follow. Chapter 7. A Gilded Cage. The aftermath of the fight was a surreal, ringing silence. Damien stood amidst the wreckage of the diner, his body still thrumming with a violence that made Ashley's skin prickle. He looked at her, and the feral fire in his eyes was slowly being banked by a familiar, haunting pain. Without a word, he grabbed her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle, and pulled her towards the back door. His decision was absolute, spoken in a low tone that left no room for argument. "You're not safe here anymore. You're coming with me." And just like that, her life was no longer her own. He took her to a small, secluded cabin nestled deep within the pack's territory, far from the main lodge. By any standard, it was beautiful. Polished wood floors, a big stone fireplace, a soft bed with clean-smelling sheets. Compared to her dingy apartment above the diner, it was a palace. But the heavy wooden door had a new, sturdy lock, and the windows only looked out on an endless sea of silent, watching trees. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a gilded cage. Damien became her shadow, a constant, brooding presence. He claimed it was for her protection, and after the attack she couldn't entirely argue. But his protection felt suffocating, like being wrapped so tightly in a blanket you couldn't breathe. He would sit for hours, cleaning his hunting knives, his golden eyes following her every move. The silence between them was a living thing, thick with unspoken words and frustrated longing. She saw the 2 sides of him at war every day. He would snap at a pack member on the phone, his voice pure alpha command, cold and ruthless. Then he would turn to her, and she'd see the lost boy from the alley, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he would never ask for. Her anger grew, a slow burn of resentment. She wasn't a treasure to be locked away. She was a person. One afternoon, while Damien was away at a tense meeting with his father, another wolf appeared at her door. He was tall and lean, with calm, intelligent gray eyes and a disarming smile. Elias, Damien's beta. He was everything Damien wasn't, poised, articulate, and radiating a soothing sense of control. "I apologize for the intrusion, Ashley," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Damien's methods can be extreme." Ashley eyed him warily. "I'm fine." Elias's smile was sympathetic. He gestured to the oppressive silence of the woods. "Are you? This isn't protection, it's a prison. You should know, not everyone in the pack agrees with his instability, or his father's cruelty." He took a small step closer, his voice dropping. "He is a vortex of chaos, pulling everything down with him. I can offer you real safety. An honored place within the pack, as your own person, not as his property. You don't have to be tied to his darkness." His offer hung in the air, a shocking, tempting lifeline. A way out. Was it genuine? Or was this just another kind of trap, baited with a different kind of smile? For the first time since Damien had returned, she was presented with a choice, a path that led away from the beautiful, tragic boy who was both her captor and her protector. Chapter 8. A Kiss of Frost and Fire. The choice gnawed at her. Elias's offer was a seed of doubt that took root in the fertile ground of her frustration. She felt like a pawn in a game she didn't understand, moved around the board by a tormented king. She needed to know if Damien's possessiveness was just the curse, just the raw instinct of the bond, or if there was anything of the man himself in it. She had to provoke him. She had to see what was real. Her chance came during a formal pack dinner at the main lodge. It was a tense affair, a transparent attempt by the Alpha to project an image of strength and unity that no one actually felt. Damien sat at the head of the long table, a thundercloud of silent fury, his eyes never straying from her for long. So she gave him something to watch. She found Elias and smiled. She let him pull out her chair for her. She laughed at one of his quiet jokes, a light, airy sound that felt foreign in her own throat. When he passed her the salt, she let her fingers brush against his, and she didn't pull away. With every small gesture, she could feel the temperature of the room dropping. She could feel the burn of Damien's stare from across the hall. It was a dangerous, stupid game, but it was hers. For the first time, she was in control of the bond, not just a victim of it. It didn't take long. He cornered her in the hallway leading to the veranda, moving with that impossible speed that left her with no escape. He pressed her back against the cold stone wall, caging her in with his arms. The calm, controlled alpha air was gone. In his place was a raw, primal force of nature. His golden eyes were blazing, shot through with sparks of fury and something darker, something that looked a lot like hurt. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled, his voice a low vibration that seemed to shake the very stones at her back. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice betraying her with a slight tremor. "Don't play games with me, Ashley," he snarled, leaning closer. The scent of pine and storm was overwhelming, intoxicating. "He can't protect you. He can't give you anything. You are mine." "I'm not a possession," she shot back, her own anger rising to meet his. "No?" The word was a breath of hot air against her lips. "Then what is this?" Before she could answer, his mouth crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a storm, a desperate, punishing claiming, full of all the rage, fear, and suffocating longing that had been suffocating them both. It was raw and brutal, but underneath the fury was a current of undeniable passion, a deep, aching need that mirrored the one in her own soul. She gasped, and his tongue swept in, tasting her, memorizing her. Her hands came up to clutch at his jacket, pulling him closer, surrendering to the beautiful, terrible fire. And then he screamed. It was a choked, agonized sound. He ripped himself away from her as if she were poison, stumbling back against the opposite wall. His whole body was trembling. He stared at his hands, at the faint, shadowy black lines that were tracing their way up his veins like creeping poison before fading away. He looked at her, his face a mask of pure horror. "You see?" he choked out, his voice cracking. "You see what you do to me? What we do?" He turned and fled, leaving her alone in the hallway, her lips still burning from his touch, her heart hammering with the terrifying, undeniable truth of their bond. Chapter 9. Anchor in the Storm. A strange and unnatural quiet fell over the Packlands in the days that followed. Damien avoided her completely, the shame and horror from their kiss creating a chasm between them. But his absence didn't bring peace. Instead, a thick, coiling fog began to seep through the trees, a mist that clung to the ground and refused to burn off even in the midday sun. It muffled sound and distorted shapes, and it felt wrong. It felt hungry. The attack came at dusk without warning. Figures emerged from the swirling gray mist, silent and terrifying. They were not wolves of flesh and blood. They were monsters woven from shadow and spite, with bodies of roiling smoke and eyes that glowed with a malevolent crimson light. The shadow wolves. They swarmed the clearing around the cabin, their silent snarls promising a death that offered no peace. The pack's warriors, Damien at the lead, met them head-on. Claws and teeth met smoke and shadow, but the creatures were relentless, reforming as quickly as they were torn apart. Ashley watched from the porch of the cabin, her heart pounding in terror. She saw Damien fighting like a demon, a whirlwind of righteous fury, his golden eyes blazing. But as the battle raged on, she noticed a horrifying change. The shadows seemed drawn to him, swirling around him, clinging to him. With every shadow wolf he destroyed, a wisp of that darkness seemed to latch onto his soul. The pure gold of his eyes began to flicker, tainted with flecks of that same evil crimson. A growl ripped from his throat that was deeper, uglier, less his own. He was becoming more brutal, his movements losing their fluid grace and becoming jerky, enraged. He was losing himself to the curse. The breaking point came when one of his own warriors, a young wolf named Seth, was knocked to the ground near him. Damien turned, his eyes now glowing a hellish red, and raised his claws to strike his own packmate down. He didn't recognize him. He saw only an obstacle. "No!" Ashley screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Forgetting everything, her fear, her safety, his warnings, she ran. She launched herself off the porch and sprinted across the battlefield, dodging the smoky claws of the shadow creatures. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. All she had was him. She threw herself between Damien and the fallen wolf, grabbing the front of his shirt. "Damien, stop! Look at me!" He snarled, his face contorted into a monstrous mask, and for a terrifying second, she thought he would rip her apart. But she held his gaze, pouring every ounce of her will, her heart, her memory of the quiet boy in the alley, into the bond that connected them. "Remember the alley," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Remember me. This isn't you. That thing, that darkness. It is not your king." His name, her voice, her presence. It was like a splash of cold, clear water in the face of a madman. The crimson light in his eyes flickered violently. He flinched, a shudder racking his entire body. He stared at her, and through the haze of the curse, she saw him. Her Damien. He blinked, and the gold in his eyes fought its way back, pushing out the red. As his control returned, the shadow wolves around them shrieked and began to dissipate, their forms dissolving into the unnatural fog. He stared at her, breathing in ragged gasps, his body trembling. In his eyes was a look of raw, stunned awe. And in the sudden, ringing silence of the clearing, a new truth dawned on Ashley, clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He thought she was his weakness, the trigger for his curse. But he was wrong. She was the one thing that could fight it. She was his anchor. Chapter 10. The Taste of Kindness. The clearing was a wreck of shredded shadows and trampled earth. In the quiet aftermath, Damien looked at Ashley not as a liability, but as a miracle. The shift was seismic, a fundamental change in the gravity between them. The awe in his eyes gave her the courage she needed. She followed him back into the cabin, her purpose hardening from a fragile hope into solid steel. She closed the door behind them, the soft click sealing them in their own small world. "No more secrets, Damien," she said, her voice even and calm. He turned from the fireplace, his expression wary, vulnerable. "You have to tell me everything. Start with the alley. You knew who I was that night at the bonfire, didn't you? You knew and you pretended you didn't. Why?" A deep, shuddering sigh escaped him. He sank onto the hearth, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his tormented face. "Pretend," he whispered, a bitter, broken sound. "Ashley, I've never forgotten you, not for a single second." He told her everything. He spoke of his exile, of being hunted by his own father's assassins, of living like a feral animal in the woods on the edge of their territory. He was starving, not just for food, but for any sign that the world hadn't been entirely consumed by cruelty. He was losing himself, the wolf inside him growing more dominant, the boy fading away. "And then there was you," he murmured, his golden eyes fixed on her, full of a reverence that made her heart ache. "You'd come out of that diner, looking as tired as I felt, and you'd leave food. You never spoke. You never acted afraid. You just gave that little bit of kindness." His voice cracked. "It was the only thing that kept me human. It was the only reason I was able to walk back into that pack gathering as a man and not the monster my father wanted me to be." The confession unraveled the last knot of hurt in her chest. All his coldness, all his distance. It was a lie told to protect the one person who had shown him he was worth saving. Tears welled in her eyes as she crossed the room and knelt in front of him. She gently took his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away the moisture that gathered at the corners of his eyes. "You were never a monster to me," she whispered. "You were just a quiet boy I wanted to feed." That was all it took. The dam of his control broke. He surged forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that was nothing like their last one. There was no anger, no punishment, only a deep, soul-shattering tenderness. It was a kiss of gratitude, of healing, of two broken pieces finally finding their fit. His hands tangled in her hair, hers wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, passionate exploration. This was not about the bond's command. This was a choice, a raw human need. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bed, never breaking the kiss. The world narrowed to the taste of him, the solid feel of his body, the heat building between them. It felt right, inevitable, a moment of pure, perfect peace in the heart of their storm. But as he laid her down on the soft sheets, a violent tremor racked his body. He ripped his mouth from hers with a strangled cry of agony, his back arching. He clutched his head, a guttural roar of pain tearing from his throat. The curse, sensing the peak of their connection, was tearing him apart from the inside out. He scrambled off the bed, stumbling away from her as if she were the source of the fire, his face a mask of torment. The beautiful moment shattered, leaving only terror in its wake. Chapter 11. A world turned upside down. The cabin felt cold and empty after the curse's violent intrusion. The failed intimacy left a scar on the very air between them, a terrifying reminder of the invisible enemy they were fighting. Shaken and desperate, Damien finally made a decision born of pure necessity. He took Ashley to the farthest edge of the territory, to a small, isolated hut where the pack's seer lived. Lyra was ancient, her skin like wrinkled parchment, her eyes the color of a cloudy sky, seeing things beyond the physical world. The air in her hut was thick with the smell of dried herbs and old magic. Lyra listened patiently as Damien explained the curse, his voice tight with shame and frustration, recounting how the darkness had just torn their moment of connection to shreds. The old woman was silent for a long time, her cloudy eyes studying the invisible threads that bound the two of them together. When she finally spoke, her voice was like the rustle of dry leaves, but her words were a thunderclap that shook the foundations of their world. "You have been fighting the wrong enemy, son of the Alpha," she rasped, her gaze settling on Damien with a heavy dose of pity. "What are you talking about?" Damien demanded. "I'm fighting my father's magic. It feeds on my love for her. It twists it." Lyra shook her head slowly, a sad, knowing smile touching her lips. "You think this darkness feeds on warmth? On light? No. It is a creature of the cold, a thing of shadows. It doesn't feed on the connection you share. It feeds on the void you create when you deny it." Ashley stared, her mind struggling to grasp the seer's meaning. "Every time you pushed her away," Lyra continued, her cloudy eyes boring into Damien's soul. "Every time you rejected her in your heart and before the pack, you fed the beast. Your pain was its wine. Your sacrifice was its feast. You have been watering this poison garden with your own good intentions, and now you are shocked that it has grown so strong." The truth hit Damien like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face draining of all color. Every sacrifice, every cold word, every moment he'd torn himself away from her to keep her safe. He had been making it worse. He had been empowering his father. He had been tightening the chains of his own curse with his own hands. The sheer weight of his catastrophic failure was too much to bear. His strength, his pride, his entire identity as her protector, it all crumbled into dust. He looked at Ashley, his golden eyes wide with a horror and a guilt so profound it stole his breath, and the great, powerful alpha heir fell to his knees on the dusty floor of the seer's hut. He was completely, utterly broken. He reached for her hand, his touch trembling and desperate. "Ashley," he whispered, his voice shattering. "Tell me I'm yours. Even if it kills me. Tell me." Chapter 12. The choosing word of their visit to the seer spread through the pack like wildfire. The story became twisted in the telling. Damien, the mighty heir, had been brought to his knees, broken not by a rival alpha, but by his obsession with an unmarked stray. The pack, already on edge from the Shadow Wolf attack, was now simmering with fear and doubt. They saw a leader consumed by his own demons, and their loyalty began to fray. Elias, the calm and steady Beta, saw his moment. He called for a pack council, gathering the senior members in the great hall of the lodge. Damien was there, hollow-eyed and silent, with Ashley standing quietly behind his chair. She was no longer his prisoner. She was his only ally. Elias stood before the council fire, his voice ringing with conviction and false concern. "Brothers, sisters, we have faced an attack from a dark magic we do not understand. Our alpha-in-waiting is compromised." He gestured towards Damien, not with malice, but with a calculated look of pity. "His instability, his connection to this outsider, has put us all in danger. His rejection of the bond, and now this sudden reversal, shows a mind in turmoil. Can we follow a wolf who is at war with himself? We need a leader. We need strength and stability, not a lovelorn boy chasing ghosts." He was good. His words were reasonable, planting seeds of fear in the hearts of the pack. Ashley could feel the tide turning. The council members muttered their agreement, their faces grim. They were looking for an easy answer, and Elias was offering one. They were ready to cast Damien aside. It was happening again. They were choosing to abandon the quiet, broken boy when he needed them most. But this time, he wasn't alone. Ashley stepped out from behind Damien's chair. She walked into the center of the circle, her head held high. A hush fell over the hall. All eyes were on the weak, unmarked she-wolf they had dismissed and pitied. "You're wrong," she said. Her voice didn't shout. It was clear, steady, and it cut through the tension like a clean blade. "You speak of strength as if it is something loud and brutal. You think a true alpha is one who feels nothing? Who pushes everything away?" She turned, her gaze sweeping over the council members, meeting every eye. "I have seen Damien at his weakest. And I have seen him fight with a power none of you can comprehend, a power that comes from his heart. You are afraid because you don't understand his battle. You are right about one thing. He is at war. But his enemy is not his love for me. She walked until she stood beside Damien, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with disbelief and a flicker of hope. His enemy is a tyrant who taught him that love was a weakness, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. We have all been taught that. To be strong is to be hard. To be powerful is to be cruel. But that is the lie of a coward. True strength is choosing to fight for what you love, even when it terrifies you. She looked directly at Elias, her gaze unwavering. Strength isn't cruelty, it's love. Chapter 13. An Unbreakable Vow. The Great Hall was a tinderbox of shock and outrage. Ashley's words still hung in the air, a direct challenge to a century of pack law. Elias stared at her, his charming mask finally cracking to reveal the cold, ambitious wolf beneath. The sympathy in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of sheer fury. He had offered her a safe, clean cage, and she had chosen the storm instead. You are a fool, he spat, his voice low and venomous, so only she could hear. He will be the death of you. I am offering you a way out, a life. Take my hand, Ashley. This is your last chance. He extended his hand, a final public offer of sanctuary. The entire council watched, holding its breath. This was the moment the line would be drawn. She looked at his hand, then at Damien, who watched her with a raw, desperate hope in his golden eyes. He wasn't commanding her. He was leaving the choice entirely to her. She turned her back on Elias. Your safety is a cage, she said, her voice loud enough for the whole council to hear, and your life is a compromise. I would rather be free in his storm than chained in your calm. She walked to Damien's side and stood before him, a clear, unwavering declaration. A gasp rippled through the pack. It was a choice so bold, so contrary to their ideals of strength, that it left them speechless. The council meeting dissolved into chaos, alliances fracturing in real time. Later, alone in the quiet of the cabin, the weight of her choice settled around her. Damien stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. You shouldn't have done that, he murmured, his voice thick with a new emotion. Awe. You've made yourself his enemy. No, she said, coming to stand beside him. I've made myself your ally. He finally turned to face her, his expression stripped of all its walls. All the pain, the fear, and the desperate love he felt for her were laid bare in his eyes. He slowly raised a hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, as if he were seeing her for the very first time. There were no more secrets, no more misunderstandings, only a terrifying, beautiful truth. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You don't get to decide that, she whispered back. He lowered his head and his lips met hers. This kiss was different from all the others. It wasn't the angry claiming in the hall or the desperate healing by the fire. This was a vow. It was slow, deep, and deliberate. It was the taste of acceptance, the feeling of a final surrender to a fate they were now choosing to build together. It was a promise made in the face of certain doom. This kiss was the seal on their pact, a quiet declaration of war against the entire world. It felt like both a beginning and an end, the first breath of a new life and the last rites for the ones they were leaving behind. Chapter 14. The Father's Voice. Their new alliance hardened the lines within the pack. Whispers followed Ashley everywhere she went. Some looked at her with a newfound respect, but most saw her as a poison that had infected their future alpha. They were isolated, a faction of two against a rising tide of fear orchestrated by Elias. The air itself felt thin, stretched tight with the promise of violence. It came on a moonless night. They weren't shadow wolves this time, they were real. 4 massive wolves, their fur the color of dried blood, their eyes glowing with an unnatural inner light. Assassins. They moved with a chilling silence, their paws making no sound on the forest floor. They weren't here to test Damien. They were here to take Ashley. The attack was a blur of coordinated fury. Damien met them with a roar, shifting into a form that was more beast than man, a creature of pure protective instinct. He was magnificent, a whirlwind of black fur and flashing claws, but there were 4 of them. They were skilled, their movements cloaked in a dark magic that seemed to sap his strength. As he fought, Ashley could see the terrible conflict within him. With every blow he took, a wave of dark energy would offer him more power. It was a seductive whisper from the curse, a promise of victory if he would only let the shadows in. He fought them, his body trembling with the strain of holding back the very power that could save him. Then, the unthinkable happened. While he was occupied with 2 of the assassins, a third lunged from the shadows, its jaws snapping inches from her throat. She screamed, stumbling backward over a tree root. Before the beast could strike again, Damien was there, a black streak of vengeance. But in his desperation to reach her, he had let his guard down. He had opened the door to the darkness. His eyes flared with a light that was no longer just gold, but a terrifying mix of gold and oily shadow. He dispatched the wolf with a single, brutal swipe that was far more powerful than anything he had shown before. He stood over the assassin's body, panting, his head hung low. "Damien?" Ashley whispered, her voice trembling. He lifted his head slowly. He looked at her, but the eyes were not his. The gold was gone, swallowed by a possessive, ancient darkness. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, a chilling expression that was utterly alien. When he spoke, the voice was a layered, rasping whisper that seemed to echo from a great distance, coming from his mouth but not from him. "So," the voice hissed, filled with a cold amusement, "this is the little flame that warms my broken toy." Ice flooded Ashley's veins. It was him, the Alpha, his father. He was looking at her through his own son's eyes. The possessed face tilted, studying her with a predator's intensity. Then the voice delivered its final, chilling promise. "When I rise from the shadows, girl, she dies first." The dark light in his eyes vanished. Damien cried out and collapsed to the ground, unconscious, the psychic connection severed. But the cold voice of his father remained, branded into her very soul. Chapter 15. The Forging of a Weapon. Damien was weak and disoriented when he awoke, the memory of the possession leaving him pale and shaken. The psychic violation had left him feeling filthy, like a stranger in his own skin. His first instinct was to retreat, to build the walls back up, to push Ashley away for what felt like the 100th time. He looked at her with a terror that was aimed not at his father, but at himself. "You see?" he rasped, his voice raw. "He can use me. He can get to you through me. You're not safe, Ashley. You have to leave." But the girl who would have once been crushed by those words was gone. The father's threat had not broken her. It had forged her fear into a weapon of cold, hard fury. She met his terrified gaze without flinching, her own eyes blazing with a defiant fire. "No," she said, her voice cutting through his despair. "I'm done running. I'm done being the secret you have to protect and the weakness our enemies want to exploit. Do you hear me, Damien? I am done." She knelt in front of him, grabbing his hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "He thinks I'm your weakness? Good. Let him. Let him underestimate me. Let him believe that the girl who hides behind you is all I'll ever be." A fierce, dangerous energy radiated from her, a strength that stunned him into silence. She was no longer just his anchor. She was becoming a sword. "He made a mistake tonight, Damien," she continued, her voice dropping to an intense, determined whisper. "He showed us his hand. He told us exactly what he's afraid of. He isn't afraid of your strength, or your claws, or your title. He's afraid of us. He's afraid of this bond. He's afraid of what you feel for me." Her words were a revelation, a spark in the darkness of his guilt. She was right. The threat was an act of fear, not of strength. "So we are going to stop fighting it," she declared, her eyes locking with his. "We are going to stop letting it be a curse, and we are going to start using it as the weapon it was meant to be. If embracing this bond is what he fears most, then we are going to become his living nightmare. We are going to feed it, strengthen it, and ram it down his throat. I will not be your weakness. I will be the one who helps you break your chains, even if it kills me." He stared at her, at the incredible, unbreakable spirit of the woman before him, the woman he loved. The quiet girl from the alley was gone, and in her place sat a queen ready to go to war for her king. He felt her strength flow into him through their clasped hands, extinguishing the last of his fear. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through him. He squeezed her hands, his decision made. "Okay," he breathed. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were planning a rebellion. Chapter 16. The Viper's Smile. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing. They were finally fighting back, gathering the few wolves still loyal to Damien's cause in the dead of night. Their plan was risky, built on a sliver of information from a pack elder who had secretly pledged his support. He'd told them of a forgotten service tunnel, a path that led directly beneath the Alpha's main lodge, bypassing the guards. It was their one chance to strike at the heart of Alistair's power. They moved through the narrow, suffocating darkness of the tunnel, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and rust. Ashley's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the tense silence. Damien was a shadow beside her, his body coiled with a lethal focus, his hand never far from hers. This felt different. This felt like the beginning of the end. The tunnel opened up into a small antechamber, just as the elder had promised. Damien gave her a look, a mix of grim determination and a deep, unspoken promise. He pushed the heavy stone door open and stepped through. Into a trap. They weren't in a forgotten cellar. They were in the center of the grand throne room. It was brightly lit, and lining the walls were a dozen of Alistair's elite guard, armed and waiting. At the far end of the room, standing beside the massive, empty throne carved from obsidian, was Elias. The trusted pack elder who had given them the information stood beside him, his head bowed in shame. Elias's calm, reasonable smile was gone. In its place was a smirk of pure, triumphant venom. "Did you truly believe it would be that easy?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Did you think I would let this pack, our future, rest on the shoulders of a broken-down sentimentalist and his little stray?" Betrayal, cold and sharp, stabbed through Ashley. Damien let out a roar of pure fury, a sound of a breaking heart and a king's rage, and launched himself at the beta. But the guards were ready. The moment his feet left the ground, a net woven with threads of pure silver dropped from the ceiling, entangling him. He crashed to the floor, his skin sizzling where the metal touched him, his howls of pain echoing off the stone walls. The guards swarmed him, pinning him down under the burning net. Ashley screamed and tried to run to him, but two of Elias's men grabbed her, their hands like iron bands on her arms. "Alistair rewards strength. He promises order," Elias said, walking over to loom above the struggling Damien. "I simply chose the winning side. You should have taken my offer when you had the chance, Ashley." Damien thrashed against his restraints, his golden eyes wild with a despair that was more painful than the silver burns. He looked at Ashley, at her terrified face as she was held fast by his enemies. He had failed. He had led her right into the viper's nest. "No!" he roared, a desperate broken sound as the guards began to drag her away. The last thing she saw before the heavy chamber doors slammed shut was his face, twisted in agony as he was forced to watch her disappear. Chapter 17. The Shadow on the Throne. They didn't throw her in a dungeon. The room was luxurious, filled with expensive furniture and silk tapestries, but it was a cage all the same. The air was cold and still, carrying a faint, cloying scent of something ancient and predatory. Ashley's terror was a living thing, a frantic bird beating its wings against the inside of her ribs. The doors opened, and he entered. Alpha Alistair was not the monster she had imagined. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and possessed a chilling, ageless charisma. He looked like Damien, but as if carved from marble instead of living stone. He had the same golden eyes, but they were utterly devoid of warmth. They were the cold, dead eyes of a shark, ancient and entirely without mercy. He didn't threaten her. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply walked to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of wine, his movements graceful and controlled. "You must be the girl who has caused so much trouble," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. It was the same voice she had heard whisper from Damien's mouth. "I confess, I am disappointed. I expected more." He was playing with her, his words designed to dismantle her piece by piece. He handed her a glass of wine, which she refused to take. He merely smiled and set it down. "You believe you are fighting for love, don't you?" he continued, swirling the dark red liquid in his glass. "You think your bond is some grand cosmic destiny. It is adorable, really, but you have it all wrong." He took a slow sip of wine, his dead eyes fixed on her. "Damien was never my heir. He was a crucible, an engine. My curse was not a punishment. It was his entire purpose for being. His pain, his longing, his pathetic, desperate love for you. It does not weaken him. It converts his life force into a power that I can draw upon. It sustains me. It makes me eternal. He was born to be my battery, and you, my dear, have been the most wonderfully efficient fuel source I have ever found." The world tilted under Ashley's feet. The cruel truth of his words was meant to shatter her, to make her entire struggle, her entire love feel not just meaningless, but like an active contribution to his evil. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over her. Every sacrifice, every choice, had only fed the monster in front of her. But then she thought of the boy in the alley, the food she gave him, the look in his eyes. That was real. That had mattered. A tiny, defiant spark ignited in the depths of her despair. "You're wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "You may have built his cage, but you never knew his heart." Alistair's smile widened, a truly terrifying sight. He seemed impressed. Such spirit. A beautiful sentiment to take to your grave. He gestured to the massive doors at the end of the room. "Now, let us see if that conviction survives the grand finale, shall we?" The heavy doors began to swing open. Chapter 18. The Last Whisper. Damien was hurled into the room like a sack of broken bones. He was covered in blood and fresh silver burns, his movements sluggish and pained. He looked up, his gaze locking onto Ashley, and a fresh wave of agony and fury washed over his face. He struggled to rise to fight, but his strength was gone. "A beautiful, tragic sight, isn't it?" Alistair said, circling them like a vulture. "The broken prince and the commoner who loves him. It is time to end this little play." Alistair placed a hand on Damien's head. A dark, shadowy energy began to flow from the father into the son. Damien screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony, as his own will was systematically ripped away. His body convulsed on the floor, his muscles locking up in a horrific battle for control of his own soul. Ashley watched in frozen terror, unable to move, unable to breathe. The fight was short. Damien's screams subsided into ragged gasps. He slowly, shakily got to his feet. The last flicker of warmth in his golden eyes was extinguished, replaced by the same cold, dead light that resided in his father's. The man she loved was gone, and a perfect, horrifying puppet stood in his place. "Fulfill the prophecy," Alistair's voice commanded, coming from his own mouth but echoing in the movements of his son. "The curse demands its conclusion. Destroy the thing you love. End her." The possessed Damien turned and looked at Ashley. There was no recognition, no conflict. There was only the empty, soulless command. He began to stalk toward her, his movements stiff and unnatural. He raised a hand, his claws sliding out with a soft snick, gleaming under the cold light of the throne room. This was it. The ultimate fulfillment of the curse. Her deepest fear made real. To be destroyed by the very hands she had fought so hard to save. He stood before her now, so close she could feel the cold radiating from him. He raised his claws, aiming for her heart. She could scream, she could try to run, but she knew it was hopeless. Instead, a strange, profound calm washed over her. She had one last move to make, one last thing that was entirely her own. She looked past the dead eyes, searching for any trace of the boy she knew was still trapped inside. Her voice was not a scream or a plea, but a soft, unwavering whisper, a final testament of a love that refused to be extinguished. "I fed you when no one saw you," she breathed, her words a gentle caress in the face of certain death. "And I'll love you when no one else dares." The gleaming claws stopped, trembling, a hair's breadth from her chest. Darkness. Silence. Chapter 19. The Echo of Kindness. Silence. The gleaming claws trembled, suspended an inch from her heart. Ashley's whispered words hung in the cold, dead air of the throne room, a spell of their own, woven from a magic Alistair could not comprehend. His power was built on pain, on fear, on domination. Unconditional love was a foreign concept, a flaw in his perfect, cruel equation. The puppet's strings stuttered. Alistair's perfect control wavered. Inside the prison of his own body, Damien heard her. Her voice was not a sound but a light, the echo of a kind hand in a filthy alley, the warmth of an anchor in a sea of shadows. It was the one true thing in a world of lies. It gave him something to hold on to. He fought. The possessed body trembled violently. A low groan of immense internal struggle rattled in Damien's chest. The dead light in his eyes flickered, and for a bare second, a spark of pure gold flared to life. Alistair, enraged at this defiance, tried to reassert his control. His voice, layered and demonic, ripped from Damien's throat. "Kill her! Finish it!" But the crack was already there. Fueled by her words, Damien's spirit rose up, a king reclaiming his stolen throne. He let out a roar of pure, agonized rebellion, and this time, the voice was his own. He clawed at his own head, fighting the intruder in his soul. The dark, shadowy energy encasing him began to fissure, cracking like obsidian struck by a hammer. He locked eyes with Ashley, and through the haze of battle, she saw him, her Damien, wounded, fighting. "Ashley!" He gasped, her name a prayer and a weapon. The name, spoken with his own will, was the final blow. The possession shattered. A wave of raw, magical energy exploded outward, throwing Alistair back against his throne. The shadowy aura around Damien dissolved into nothing. He collapsed to the floor, weak, gasping for breath, but finally blessedly free. Alistair stared, his cold composure broken for the first time by a look of sheer disbelief. His perfect weapon had malfunctioned. His guards, stunned by this impossible turn of events, hesitated for a fatal second. In that moment of chaos, Ashley ran to Damien, hauling him to his feet. "Now!" she breathed, her voice urgent. He leaned on her, his body weak but his will like iron. Together they turned their backs on the stunned tyrant and plunged into the darkness of a side corridor, their one and only chance for escape. Chapter 20. A Vow of Fire. They found sanctuary in a network of hidden caves, a secret refuge for the few wolves who had refused to bow to Elias or Alistair. Damien was recovering, but the psychic battle had left deep, invisible wounds. He felt the phantom touch of his father's magic, a lingering poison in his soul. He knew it was only a matter of time before Alistair tried to seize control again, and next time he might not be strong enough to fight back. "We can't beat him like this," Damien said, his voice raspy as Ashley cleaned a deep gash on his arm. "His magic is tied to me." As long as the curse exists, he has a doorway into my mind. Then we have to destroy the doorway, Ashley replied, her voice filled with a new, hard-edged resolve. It's not that simple. The curse is woven into my life force, into my soul. Then we use a stronger magic. The voice belonged to the old pack elder, the one who had led them into the trap. He had found them, his face a mask of shame and regret, and had sworn to atone for his weakness. There is one ritual left to us. The mating, he said, his voice heavy. Not just the bite, but the full ancient rite. The ceremony that merges two souls into one. Hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered in Ashley's chest. The ritual will create a surge of power unlike any other, the elder explained, his eyes grave. The pure energy of a completed mate bond. It could act like a cleansing fire, a spiritual cauterization powerful enough to burn the parasite of the curse from your soul for good. Could. Damien seized on the word. What's the risk? The elder's gaze fell. The curse will not die quietly. When threatened with annihilation, it will fight back. It could consume the energy of the rite and incinerate you both from the inside out. You would either be freed, or you would both be destroyed in the fire. Silence descended on the cave. Damien looked at Ashley, his golden eyes filled with an unbearable anguish. After everything, he could not ask her to take this final, terrible risk. It was his curse, his burden to bear. He opened his mouth to refuse, to tell her to save herself. But she spoke first. She reached out, taking his hand, her grip firm and steady. She looked him in the eyes, her expression leaving no room for argument, no room for his self-sacrificing nobility. You stood in a storm for me. You fought monsters for me. You walked through your own personal hell for me, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. Don't you dare ask me to stand in the quiet while you face the fire alone. She leaned in, her forehead touching his. If I burn, she whispered, sealing their fate with a vow. I burn with you. Chapter 21, The Gathering Storm. The story of what happened in the throne room spread through the pack like a cleansing fire. It was a tale whispered in the dead of night, a legend that grew with each telling. Damien, the broken heir, had been possessed by the Alpha's dark magic. And Ashley, the unmarked, the outsider, had broken the spell not with claw or fang, but with a quiet, unwavering declaration of love. It was a new kind of power, a different definition of strength, and it was more compelling than Alistair's tyranny or Elias's cold logic. The pack, fractured by fear, began to question. They looked at the oppressive order Alistair had imposed, the fear he used as a weapon, and they saw it for the weakness it was. They saw Damien's struggle not as a flaw, but as a testament to his incredible resilience. And they saw Ashley as the heart of that strength. They started to come. At first, it was just one or two, the loyalists who had never wavered. Then came others, their faces filled with a mixture of shame and new determination. Wolves who had been swayed by Elias now sought out the cave, their eyes opened to the truth. They came to pledge their loyalty not to a birthright, but to the Alpha and Luna who had shown them that love was not a weakness, but the sharpest weapon in their arsenal. Within days, their small band of refugees had swelled into a small, determined army. Damien, with Ashley always at his side, stood before them at the mouth of the cave. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by the steady fire of a true king. He was no longer a prince fighting for his throne. He was a wolf fighting for the soul of his family. My father offered you order, he called out, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing. But it was the order of a cage. He offered you strength, but it was the strength of a chain. He ruled through fear because he is a coward, afraid of anything he cannot control. I offer you something else. I offer you freedom. The freedom to choose. The freedom to love without fear. Tonight, we are not just taking back our territory. We are taking back our future. A roar of approval went up from the assembled wolves. a sound of hope and rebellion. The time for hiding was over. The time for planning was done. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in colors of blood and fire, they marched. Damien and Ashley led the way, no longer a broken prince and his stray, but a king and queen leading their people to war. They walked side by side, their hands clasped together, their faces set toward the final confrontation. The storm had finally gathered, and it was ready to break. Chapter 22. To Claim the Dawn. The grounds of the Alpha's lodge became a whirlwind of snarling fury. The battle erupted under the cold light of the moon, a chaotic storm of wolf against wolf. Damien was a black-furred hurricane at the center of it all, his every move a testament to a king fighting for his home. Ashley stayed close, her heart pounding in time with the savage sounds of the fight, her own nascent wolfish instincts screaming in the back of her mind. Damien fought his way toward Elias, the traitorous beta. Their confrontation was brutal, a dance of claw and fang fueled by betrayal and righteous fury. With a final, desperate lunge, Damien threw Elias to the ground, his teeth at the beta's throat. He had won the physical battle, but the true enemy was not made of flesh and blood. "Impressive," a cold voice echoed across the battlefield, silencing the chaos. Alpha Alistair stood on the steps of the lodge, untouched by the violence. He raised a hand and a wave of pure, shadowy power slammed into Damien, throwing him back. The curse. Alistair was calling it, forcing it to the surface. "It is time to end this," Alistair hissed, his eyes glowing with a sickening dead light. The shadows coiled around Damien, thick and suffocating. He cried out, his body convulsing as he fought the familiar, terrifying pull of the possession. He was weakened from the fight, his defenses low. Ashley saw his golden eyes begin to flicker, the shadows threatening to swallow the light for good. He was losing. This was it, their one and only chance. "Damien!" Ashley screamed, fighting her way through the stunned combatants to reach his side. She fell to her knees in front of him, grabbing his face, forcing him to look at her. "Now, the right! Choose me! Fight him, and choose me!" Through the haze of his father's magic, he heard her. He saw her, his anchor, his salvation. With a guttural roar that was both agony and defiance, he fought through the possession's hold and lunged forward, sinking his teeth into the soft flesh of her shoulder. Not a wound, but a mark, a claim, a choice. A surge of raw, untamed energy shot through her. She cried out, arching her back, and then lunged forward, biting his own shoulder in return, completing the ancient, unbreakable circuit. The world exploded in a flash of blinding golden light. Power erupted from them, a pure, cleansing firestorm of two souls becoming one. It was the unrestrained magic of a true mate bond, unleashed in its full glory. Alistair, connected to Damien through the parasitic curse, was caught in the heart of the inferno. He screamed, a high, thin sound of disbelief as his own dark magic was turned back on him, incinerating him from the inside out. He dissolved into a pillar of black ash and then... nothing. The golden light faded, leaving a sudden, ringing silence in its wake. The curse, its master destroyed, shattered like glass. The battle was over. The dawn was breaking. Chapter 23. A King on His Knees. In the eerie quiet of the battlefield, the surviving wolves slowly rose to their feet, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. They stared at the empty space where their cruel alpha had once stood, and then at the new silvery mark that glowed softly on Ashley's shoulder. The air, once thick with dark magic, was now clean and crisp with the promise of a new day. For Damien, the silence was overwhelming. For the first time in his entire life, the nagging, poisonous whisper of the curse in the back of his mind was gone. The absence of that constant, corroding presence was a shock, a vast and peaceful emptiness he had never known. He could feel the bond between him and Ashley, no longer a source of pain or a conduit for his father's evil, but a pure, warm, and steady light in his soul. He was free. He turned slowly to look at Ashley, who stood before him, her eyes shining with tears of relief and love. She had done it. She had faced down his demons and had not flinched. She had walked into the fire with him and pulled him back from the ashes. Words were not enough. They were small, clumsy things, completely inadequate for the tidal wave of emotion crashing through him. So he did the only thing that felt right. The alpha, the victor, the king of their pack, slowly dropped to one knee, and then the other. He knelt before her on the damp, blood-stained earth, not in defeat or despair, but in an act of pure, unadulterated devotion. He took her hand, pressing his forehead against her knuckles. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice thick and cracking with the weight of a lifetime of pain finally being lifted. The pack watched, stunned into silence. Elias, his arm broken and his pride shattered, saw this incredible act of submission. Not weakness, but a strength he had never understood. He lowered his head, a silent acknowledgement of his new alpha and the incredible power of his Luna. One by one, following his lead, the other wolves, friend and former foe alike, bent their knees. They bowed to the she-wolf who had once been an outcast, the quiet girl they had called weak. They bowed to their queen. Chapter 24: The Quiet Boy's Kitchen. Several weeks later, the morning sun streamed into the large, airy kitchen of the Alpha's lodge. The pack was healing, the old wounds of fear and division slowly being replaced by a new sense of hope and unity. Ashley walked into the room, drawn by a strange scratching sound and the faint smell of something burning. She stopped in the doorway, a laugh bubbling up in her chest. Damien, the alpha of the entire territory, the warrior who had faced down a cursed tyrant, stood by the stove wearing a flour-dusted apron. He was scowling with intense concentration at a frying pan, from which a thin plume of black smoke was rising. He was armed with a spatula, and he was losing a one-on-one battle with a pancake. He scraped the blackened disc from the pan and added it to a wobbly, slightly charred stack on a plate. He hadn't noticed her yet, his entire focus on his culinary enemy. It was the most endearing, most wonderful thing she had ever seen. He finally sensed her presence and looked up, his fierce scowl melting into a sheepish, lopsided grin. The sunlight caught the gold in his eyes, and for the first time, they held no trace of shadow, no hint of old pain. They were just warm and bright and full of a quiet, peaceful love. "Breakfast is, served," he said, gesturing to the plate with his spatula. She walked over, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind and resting her head against his strong back. "What's all this?" she murmured into his shirt. He relaxed into her embrace, turning his head to kiss her hair. His voice was soft, laced with a gentle humor that was still new and precious. He started, then paused, a hint of the shy, quiet boy from the alley returning for a moment. "I just wanted to feed you." Tears of pure, unadulterated joy welled in her eyes. She squeezed him tighter, laughing through the happy tears. The invisible, insecure girl who had once left scraps in a dark alley for a boy no one else saw was now home. The boy she had fed when he had nothing was now the man, her mate, her alpha, who wanted to give her everything. It was never about a grand destiny written in the stars. It was about a small, quiet choice, made in the dark, to show a little kindness. And it had changed the entire world.